Okay, you can start.
Okay, great. It's not letting me. It says, please request permission from the meeting host. So.
Give me 1 second here.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not able to record yet.
Okay, allowed to record.
Okay. Great.
Hare Krishna.
Jai Lakshmana Mata.
Hare Krishna.
Oh.
Maharaj, should I start kirtan?
Please.
Okay. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Where are you off to?
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Jai Om Vishnupad Purnaman Supariprajakacharya Ashto Turasati Shri Shrimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kunigiri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Navadip Dham ki jai, Jagannath Puri ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Jamana Mai ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Gaur. Welcome to all. Thank you all for coming. Om Jnanatimirantasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurn Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Datati Shapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Jatapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Shahagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Shahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kamshana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hori Priye Vancha Kolpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Pyevacha Titanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The first thing is I wanted to note that our Dukahantri Dasi, who's usually here with us on the calls, has not been doing well with her health. She was in hospital with like severe arthritis that was like cost her the use of a leg or something along those lines, quite serious enough. And I don't know if she's been released to rehab yet or not. That was the plan. So Kamalini is in touch with her and looking after her, but I thought I'd bring it to your attention. Your prayers and good wishes will be of value. Now, I thought we might change our subject tonight on account of low attendance, but our attendance is pretty much as usual. So from that point of view, I guess we can soldier forward, yeah? We have agreement on that? Okay, everybody's
Agreed.
nodding their heads and presumed agreement. We've been talking about the 4 rules, Prabhupada's perennial question when giving initiation. What are the 4 rules? And these are, or what are the 4 rules that you agree to follow? That was another way that he would put it. So we all know that, although typically to some amusement, devotees who know the 4 rules very well would become tongue-tied at the time of initiation. But the 4 rules are no gambling, no meat eating, no intoxication, and no illicit sex. So we've covered the first three, and we're in the midst of discussing Rule 4, no illicit sex. There was a quote I was looking for last time we met, and I found it. This is from Prabhupada Lamrita, 1966. To speak ill of sexual pleasure was certainly not a strategic move for one who wanted to create followers among the Lower East Side hippies. But Prabhupada never considered changing his message. In fact, when Umapati had mentioned that Americans didn't like to hear that sex was only for conceiving children, Prabhupada had replied, I cannot change the philosophy to please the Americans. So that was Prabhupada's statement in that regard. Now there's another one from 1966, which is quite famous. Let me find, here it is. Quite a famous incident, but nicely written up by Hayagriva Prabhu concerning one Mr. Goldsmith. Mr. Goldsmith was an American Jewish lawyer who helped Srila Prabhupada incorporate ISKCON. And here's an exchange. And what about sex? Asks Stephen Goldsmith during the post-Kirtan question period. After the exchange over the war issue, you can imagine what that was, that Prabhupada was pro-war during the Vietnam era, or at least not anti-war. After the exchange over the war issue, Mr. Goldsmith has not been so friendly with Swamiji. His even mentioning sex surprises us. Sex only with wife, Swamiji says, and even that is restricted. Sex is meant for the propagation of Krishna-conscious children. My Guru Maharaj used to say that if he could beget Krishna-conscious children, he would have sex 100 times. Yet this is so difficult in this age that he remained brahmachari, celibate. But sex is a very strong force, Mr. Goldsmith protests, not letting the subject drop. What a man feels for a woman is undeniable. Therefore, there is the institution of marriage, Swamiji says. So you can get yourself married and live peacefully with one woman. But the wife should not be used as a machine for sense gratification. Sex life must be regulated. What do you mean by regulated? Only with wife, he says, for children. But what if you don't want children? Or if you have enough children? Are there any other restrictions? Yes, Swamiji says, then falls silent. We wait, but he says nothing more, apparently not wanting to discuss the matter in more detail. I'm not ready to have children, Mr. Goldsmith persists, but this doesn't mean that I'm prepared to give up sex. No, Swamiji says, restriction there must be. It is not that we are to go to sex like cats and dogs. Sex should be restricted to once monthly to beget nice children. Once monthly? Easier to forget the whole thing, I say. Acha, that's it, Swamiji says. Best not to think of it. Best to chant, just to chant Hare Krishna. Then we are saved so much botheration. Sex is like an itch. When we scratch, it gets worse. So we must tolerate it and ask Krishna to help us. We must understand that sex life is the highest material pleasure and therefore the strongest bond to material life, to rebirth in the material world. Therefore, Krishna tells Arjuna, Avritam Gyanametena Gyanino Nityavairina Kamarupena Konteya Dushpurena Analena Cha. A man's pure consciousness is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Krishna uses the word kama, lust, what we call sex life. That is all that keeps us from Krishna consciousness. Stephen Goldsmith shakes his head, and Swamiji looks at him, smiling, as if to say, is there still a problem? It's just that, well, it's been proved dangerous to repress the sex drive. There's a theory that we have wars because people are eating meat, Swamiji interjects. We will have wars as long as people eat meat. And if a man eats meat, he will be sure to have illicit sex also. Blam, blam, hit with double-barreled blasts, Mr. Goldsmith quietly puts on his hat and walks out the door. So that's our account from Hayagriva Prabhu of Srila Prabhupada in 1966, quite straightforwardly stating what these rules are. Any questions so far or comments? Blam, blam.
Maharaj, I was just thinking how, actually, I've been thinking this for quite a while, that the sort of reaction that Prabhupada got in that particular exchange is the sort of reaction you'd expect from a crowd of people who are already addicted to illicit sex. It's like when you have a 12-step meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's understood that everybody there is trying to become free from the addiction. So there's sympathy amongst your hearers as long as people are trying to come to a certain standard. But that sort of reaction, that it's comical that Hayagriva Prabhu gives. Better to forget the whole thing. He's shocked at the idea of once a month. But for someone who's
says yes.
yeah, it is better. But but for someone who's raised from the beginning with understanding of the benefits of spiritual life, the detriments of breaking these principles, it seems like they wouldn't ask a question like only once a month. They would understand that everything has a purpose, and they wouldn't behave like addicts, which we're a nation of addicts. And I've thought of this many times, that all of these principles that we promise to follow are principles that are the most highly addictive, and they ruin your mind.
Yes, they do. I was thinking about that same thing over the last couple of days in regard to our seminar, that because it's written somewhere that, if you're following the less strict principle, it's not straight out written that way, but if you're following the less strict principle, you can still advance just as much in Krishna consciousness. But that doesn't seem to be the case, that one can, what should we say, live a life of unrestricted indulgence in sex and at the same time make advancement in yoga. This is, interestingly, here's the follow-up that Hayagriva writes. After the meeting, the sexual regulations are much discussed. He can't expect us to give up sex, someone says. He'll chase everyone away with that philosophy. He didn't say we have to give it up, Roy says. That's later Ray Rama. Once a month, same thing. You mean I have to have a kid every time I want sex? One girl complains. Forget it. I thought Krishna was the god of love, someone says. Where does he say not to have sex? What Swamiji said was very basic, Wali says. That's later Umapati. All gurus discourage sex, don't they? It's like telling a kid not to wet his pants. Admitted, we're not even in spiritual kindergarten. But America now rides the crest of the sexual revolution, and renouncing sex is like fasting at the feast. One by one, we take our questions to Swamiji. Although answering us very patiently, he doesn't budge from his position. Just know that you are drowning in the ocean of material sense enjoyment, he tells us. The Bhagavad Gita is like a good boat, and the spiritual master is like a good captain. And the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is like a good breeze. So you should take advantage of so many auspicious things and cross that ocean. When you surrender to Krishna, the material ocean is no more than rainwater in the hoofprint of a calf. So there's Srila Prabhupada's quite uncompromising position. And there's something here on chat. Let me find it out. Because I'm using a different client, my type is very small here. Is it possible that a soul is rebellious to the Supreme Lord, but not shackled by the principle of Pumsa Striya Maitini Bhava? Some people aren't devotees, but they seem to be not affected by Maya in this form. Yeah, there are other ways to be bound by the material energy. One might be captivated by something else. Of course, these days, or even other days, if it's not Pumsa Striya, sometimes it's Pumsa Pumsa or Striya Striya. That's another way of being bewildered by the material energy. Or there's self-self, which is, again, another way of being bewildered by the material energy. Or, yes, possibly not Pumsa Striya or not sex in any form, but something else. But generally, we find that it's sex. Generally, we find that it's sex. But even, well, in the mode of goodness, there's still Maya. Sukha Sangena Badnati, Jnana Sangena Chanaka. In the mode of goodness, one is regulated, one is self-controlled, one is peaceful, one is tolerant, and still one is subtly conditioned by a sense of happiness and a sense of knowledge. So that's still Maya. It's not passionate Maya, it's not even ignorant Maya, but it's still its illusion. So yes, possibly, but the usual thing, the usual expectation is where there's Maya, there's sex, and vice versa. Is that okay, Venkatesh?
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you.
Okay, now let's see. Oh, good, Apurva Kamalini is there. I mentioned on our conference that Tukantri had been in hospital. What's the report, Kamalini Mataji? Hello, hello.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Apurva Prabhu.
Yes,
How's our Dukkha Humphrey doing?
actually, she's doing in a lot better shape than she was at home, and she's holding fast. She has some major problems going on. One of which is she needs a hip replacement, and
Oh.
she's constantly on painkillers because of an extreme case of arthritis.
Hmm.
So she, every time I talk to her, she sounds a little bit better,
Mhm.
and she's on the road to recovery. We're trying to get her in a really great facility that's in Hillsborough. I don't know whether we'll need help with that. We're trying to find out if her Medicaid covers it.
Mhm.
But the other place that they wanted to send her to was the pits, or to put it mildly, it wasn't a good situation, but she never went. So I'll let you know an update on Friday, tomorrow. What can I say? I just briefly talked to her today, but she would like to get a phone call, especially from you, Maharaj.
Every time I call her, it forwards it once to voicemail.
You're not using the right number.
Okay, if you could text it to me. We don't have to do it right now, but if you could text it to me later.
Is your number a 732 area code?
No.
What is it?
Okay, let's
Need that
think I know
number.
what my you think I know what my number is, right?
Yeah, you do know.
I do know, huh?
No, I don't. Just kidding. But her
I
prayers
believe-
are very much accepted.
Excuse me?
I
It's
can
718.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, let me text this to you. We don't really need to broadcast it on, this gets broadcast.
Okay, do you have my phone number?
I believe I do.
Yeah, it's the same one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
If you don't get it from me, send me a reminder because I'm, multitasking here. And I
Okay.
easily forget. Okay, so we're all sending her, all her friends here are sending our good wishes.
I'll share that with you.
Okay. Now, we have something on the chat box, and again, in this very small type that I'm stuck with today. Let's see what it says. Vamsidhari says, while talking to new people who have heard little about our regulative principles, are not interested with the fear that they need to give up sex life or they will lose interest in this after coming to Krishna consciousness. How to address them? Like Srila Prabhupada, or tone down a bit initially so that we get opportunity to explain them further? Well, of course, this is for each preacher to decide. We may not greet people at the door and say, welcome to our temple. Our rules are no gambling, no intoxication, no meat eating, and no sex except in marriage once a month for having children. Welcome. We may not be quite so, that may not be our leading line. Prabhupada said that there are 4 stages of Krishna consciousness. He talked about this in a meeting he had with the editors of Back to Godhead. He said the first stage is to awaken people, to bring them to the stage that you're not this body, you're a spirit soul, life is meant for spiritual realization, these topics. That's the first stage. Then the second stage is that to train people. They come forward, Swamiji, please initiate me, please accept me. So then there's training, how to advance further in Krishna consciousness. Then the third stage, he said, is Krishna's dealings with his energies. Radha Krishna belongs to that third stage. And fourth stage is Paramhansa, Prabhupada said, always absorbed in thinking of Krishna. So the Back to Godhead, he said, is on the first two stages, to awaken people and to train people. So these regulative principles, one might argue, are on the second stage. The first stage is chant Hare Krishna, associate with the devotees, and so on. But if someone wants to know what is the process, how to make progress, then these are the requirements. If one seriously wants to make progress in spiritual life, one can't have unrestricted sex. It's, as Prabhupada said in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna consciousness and sex pleasure go ill together. So therefore it's allowed, but it's regulated. Prabhupada told me one time, he said, we don't say no sense gratification. I complained or said to him, it wasn't a complaint, I said to him, it's very hard to convince the college students to give up sense gratification. And Prabhupada said, we don't say give up, but regulate. Regulate. So this is the regulation. And it's very radical in today's world. But this is our teaching. What can I say? These are our principles. I was told last week, one of the devotees from the Grihastha Vision team told me that there was one Indian lady who was a Bhakti Shastri teacher, and when she heard what this rule was, she went into shock. Once a month, she just went into shock, and she's a Bhakti Shastri teacher. So we may not immediately announce all of these things, although Srila Prabhupada didn't shy away from it. We see that he's talking about these things even in 1966 to a very dissolute kind of audience, an audience that's accustomed to hedonistic activities. But he still lays it on the line. This is what it is. Now, I could say one thing about this. There's a Tulsi Priya says, how does a Bhakti Shastri teacher not know about the once a month rule? Yeah, exactly. There's a book by Rodney, there's a scholar named Rodney Stark, who's sort of the grand old man of American sociology of religion, or one of the grand old men. And he wrote a book in which, among other things, he put forward that when the rules are high, when the standards are high, when the demands are high, then people value the product more. When my friend Govardhan Prabhu in South Africa, in Johannesburg, who has a PhD in management, likes to quote that price is an indicator of value. Or sometimes he says price is the best indicator of value. When there's something that's pricey, like Gucci, you assume that there's something superior about their shoes or whatever it may be, because the price is over the moon. So when there are high standards, when there are high demands, then it's understood that there's going to be a high payoff, that you're getting something of value, that yes, you have to go through trouble to get it, but you're getting something which is worthwhile. So if it's cheap, it's probably not worth much. So the people who are looking for something serious, people who are looking for a process that will actually free them from material existence, may recognize that this is the real thing. The teachers, I know when I first read about Hare Krishna in one magazine about Prabhupada and his ashram on Second Avenue, I thought this sounds really austere, but I thought it sounds very authentic. So I thought I'd like to find something else that was like this. Not this, but like this. But then I found when I came in touch with the devotees that it wasn't so terrible after all. Anyway, Prabhupada, as he said, he wasn't prepared to compromise to please the Americans. He laid it on the line. And those who want, what do we want? Do I just want to join a religion? Do I just want to have a blissful time? Or do I seriously want to get free from material existence? Do I seriously want to get free from birth and death? Do I seriously want to put an end to the miseries of material life? If that's what I want, do I think I can do it while, just smoking a few joints now and then, or this or that? As Prabhupada used to say, it's not so cheap thing. Not such a cheap thing. So, of course, everyone will have his own discretion, and I don't want to say what others should do, but Srila Prabhupada, it seemed, didn't shy away from saying what these rules were, and didn't compromise in his presentation of them, and that's what I tried to do. Tulsi Priya says, I am less concerned about people not following the regs than I am with people not being properly instructed on what they are. It seems an injustice to people to not be straightforward with them in the beginning. If they choose to not take full advantage of the shelter being offered, that's their choice. But they should at least know where to find shelter. Yes, I agree with that. That's sort of a premise here. What you finally do about these rules, that's up to you. What we decide to follow, what we decide to even advise people, that's up to us. But certainly, at least we should know what these rules are. We should know what they are. And it's, as commented here earlier, that there's someone who's teaching Bhakti Shastri and is shocked to find out what the 4 rules are. So that indicates that things have changed since 1966 in this regard, that Prabhupada put it right out there. And yet It seems to, for all this talk that we hear about Prabhupada in the center, some things about Prabhupada are very much kept out of the center. All right, there's a question from Atina that I missed. Happy Thanksgiving. What is the source of the four regulative principles? Is it just Srila Prabhupada, or is it written in Shastra somewhere? Yeah, we talked about that on in our first class. In Srimad Bhagavatam, we find a discussion between Parikshit Maharaj and, or we find an incident of Parikshit Maharaj and the personified Kali, who was beating a cow and a bull. And there, Sutta Goswami says, after relating this incident, Abhyartitas tada tasmai sthanani kalaye dadao, dyutam panam striya shuna, yatra dharmas chaturvidha. The Kali, as a coward, really, surrendered to Parikshit Maharaj, please don't kill me. When Kali saw that he couldn't bluff his way out, that he was now facing a real Kshatriya, he surrendered. Please don't kill me. And then please give me permission to stay somewhere. Parikshit Maharaj said, all right, I won't kill you, but you can't stay in my kingdom. No, please give me some place where I can go. So then he was given permission. Abhyartita, being petitioned in this way, tada, at that time, tasmai sthanani kaliye dado. Parikshit Maharaj gave him permission to stay in four places. Dyutam, where there's gambling. Panam, drinking or intoxication. Striya, illicit association with women. And suna, animal slaughter. Yatra adharma chaturvidha. These are the four places of adharma, sinful activities. So there's your reference. And then there's also a follow-up verse. Do I have it here? Let's see if I have the follow-up verse here. Maybe someone who's there will find the follow-up verse for me. It's just the next verse. That one was 117:38. In the next verse, it said there that therefore a king, a Brahmin, a public leader, and so on, must avoid these things. Maybe Praveen or someone can find me that verse. So there you have it. It's not invented by Srila Prabhupada. It's coming from the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the 11th canto also, Chamas Muni instructs King Nimi, Loke vyavayamisha madhya seva nitya hi jantor nahitatra chodana vyavastitis teshu vivaha yagya sura grahar ashu nivrittir ishta. In this material world, the conditioned soul is always inclined to sex, meat eating, and intoxication. Therefore, religious scriptures never actually encourage such activities. Although the scriptural injunctions provide for sex through sacred marriage, for meat eating through sacrificial offerings, and for intoxication through the acceptance of ritual cups of wine, such ceremonies are meant for the ultimate purpose of renunciation. Yeah. So there are two references for you about these four regular principles, which are not invented by Srila Prabhupada. Okay, and I gave you the verse number, right? Okay, and Panchatattva has Ataitani Naseveta Bubhushu Purusha Kvachit Visheshato Dharma Shilo Raja Loka Patir Guru. Therefore, whoever desires progressive well-being, especially kings, religionists, Dharmashila, public leaders, Brahmins, and sannyasis, should never come in contact with the four above mentioned religious principles. Yes. Bubushu, those who desire well-being. Raja, the king, Lokapati, public leaders. Guruhu, the Brahmins and sannyasis. But what is the illicit sex for a Brahmin is not illicit sex for a king, no? Yeah, there are rules that are different for the Brahmins and the kings. Like we hear that the Kshatriyas, if they're approached by some woman, they have to satisfy her petition. We don't see that for the Brahmins. So maybe there's some difference. But this basic principle that sex is meant for procreation, not just for sense gratification, is the principle. This is what Prabhupada is saying. What is that? Life is not meant for sense gratification. Kamasya nendriya pritir. Labho jiveta yavata. Jivasya tattva jigyasa. Life is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. If we go for illicit sex or unrestricted sex, how are we going to keep our focus on this? Our focus is how to get free from material existence, how to inquire about the absolute truth, how to get free, how to develop love for Krishna. How can we do that and at the same time be chained to this unrestricted sex life? Apurva Prabhu, you had a hand up there.
Thank you, Maharaj. Appreciate where you're coming from. Can we get rid of the echo? Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and say something that I mentioned at the mantra retreat, which may have some bearing on this. Both my wife and I are following very strictly. And it may be that you have to bite the bullet. We followed Prabhupada's prescription. We had sex life 6 times and we chanted our 50 rounds, and that was it. And this is the process that Prabhupada gave us. And if we want the results, I remember we had one devotee who was a senior devotee from England. He was staying with us for a while, and he was mentioning that sometimes maybe you should, just for the sake, if one of the partners is so whatever you might say, then you should give in or compromise your situation. And I mentioned this to Ravinder Swarup, and he said, this is like putting your spiritual life on frozen, because first of all, we're here as initiated disciples to please the spiritual master and follow his instructions. And these are very clear instructions. It's not really so difficult if you follow the program of Krishna consciousness. you get a higher taste. It's not impossible. And I really appreciate Maharaj's Jayadvaita Swami's stand on this. Thank you.
Your stand is more valuable because you're actually in the position to represent, in fact, what I'm just talking about in theory. You know, I have it easy. I don't have a wife to think about, but you have a very highly qualified wife, and both of you are following strictly these regulative principles. So you have more, you know, adhikar to say these things than I do. So thank you very much. And this is, as you say, this is what Prabhupada taught, and it's not impossible. We have our living proof that if one is serious, one can follow these principles. One can follow. Otherwise, as Sripindra Swarup Prabhu said, we put our spiritual life on freeze, right? That's what he said.
Yeah, freeze dry. And I just wanted to say one.
Yes, please.
The result is that we have two of our children that are very much engaged in Krishna consciousness and also following the process. And you judge a thing by its results. So it does work, the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that point came out in a previous meeting. It was brought up to me offline that it's not just for restricting our own sense gratification, but it's also because we put so much emphasis on having high quality children. And the consciousness of the parents at the time of conception has an effect on what kind of children will be there. So it's, as Prabhupada would say, scientific. Let's see what comments there are still up in the chat box. Panchatattva says, Srila Prabhupada's purport for this verse is emphatic about the importance of following these principles and says they're all unqualified if not doing so. Yeah, the public leader, the king, the Brahmin, the sannyasi. Kendra says, Vamshid Hari Prabhu asks, general rule I heard in initial days is this rule means no sex outside of marriage, which most of the sensible people follow. Yeah, that's the first thing we say. No illicit sex means outside of marriage. And very often, Prabhupada just leaves it at that. He says that much. But then he does go further. I mean, he tells Mr. Goldsmith, and he tells everyone who he responds to, that this also means no sex except for procreation. Yes, the beginning is no sex outside of marriage. And then you want to know more? Okay, training means we tell you something, we tell you something more, we tell you something more. But we don't hold back. We may give it to you in bite-sized installments. That may be sometimes, but these are the rules. Otherwise, people start to think, or they're left to think that, all right, as long as I'm married, I can have sex as much as I want with contraceptives and still be practicing bhakti yoga and make lots of advancement in spiritual life. And we're doing them an injustice by allowing them to float along in that misconception. Now, let's see what's here. Tina, in Tulsi Priya's question, where is it laid out the definition of what gambling means, what illicit sex means, etc.? Because illicit sex could mean just outside of marriage. How does one know it also means outside of begetting children, etc., etc.? Thank you. We quoted that also. let's see if I can find it for you right away. I'll be happy. Let's see. Trouble is that in Microsoft Word, you don't always get it as quickly. But let's see. Yeah, here it is. 7:12:11, Srimad Bhagavatam. Etad sarvam grihastasya sammam natam yaterapi guru vrittir vikalpena grihastasyartu kamina. The significant words there are ritugamina, which means accepting sex only during the period favorable for procreation. All the rules and regulations apply equally to the householder and the sannyasi. The grihasta, however, is given permission by the spiritual master to indulge in sex during the period favorable for procreation. I also, I could probably find it. Just wrote in an email to someone in Manu, the same thing is there about basically Ritugamina. I don't think I can find it fast enough to not do an injustice to you, but I think you can take it from there that yes, these things are defined in Shastra. It's not that Prabhupada's making them up or just sort of taking it from his family tradition or something. Panchatattva says, Apurva Prabhu and Mother Kamalini ki jai. And Tulsi Priya, thank you for revealing your mind, Apurva Prabhu, jai. Atina, jai, Hare Krishna. Gurudas, Dandavats Maharaj, happy Thanksgiving. This is my first chance to come to this seminar. Has this question been asked? Why is there concession in the age of Kali for sex life? In other words, why is Kali allowed to flourish in places where sex life is prominent? Why does the Supreme Lord make concession like this? Well, first of all, it's not that Kali is allowed to be where there's sex life, but where there's illicit sex life. Dharmaviruddha bhuteshu kamosmi. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, represents me. Or to paraphrase it, sex life for having children, good children, that represents me. So so it's not that Kali is present wherever there's sex. Sex is accepted within religious principles. But where the religious principles are transgressed, then Kali can enter. Even meat eating, Prabhupada sometimes had some argument maybe with Dr. Patel that meat eating also is permitted according to Vedic Shastra. But you have to do it according to the rules and regulations. You have to worship Kali once in a month and whisper in the ear of the goat that now I'm killing you, you can come back and kill me. And then you can eat your goat. So there's some concession because there's always some class of people who insist on these things or who won't give them up. So then, all right, within regulation. And regulation means also it can become useful, that sex is not useless. Sex has its appropriate value for having good children. But for enjoyment, first of all, it causes trouble. Rajasastu palam dukkam, the result of happiness in the mode of passion, is misery. is misery. And the world is becoming like that. People don't even want to get married because they're afraid, because half the marriages become disaster cases and result in divorce. And there's so many other problems. But yes. So the more we, what is that? Bahuduka bhajam. The more we expand our sex life, the more we expand our miseries. Bahuduka bhajam. So therefore, vishaheta diva, one is meant to tolerate that itching. Just the more we itch, the more we scratch, the more it itches. This is so simple. But the modern psychology says, no, the more you scratch, the quicker you're done with it, which is contrary to experience. The more you scratch, the more it itches. And when you finally say, all right, I'm not going to scratch it anymore because my skin is ripping apart. So I have to stop scratching. Tom Wolfe, the American, late American writer, had an essay called, I forget what it was called, but it basically took this image that's common in the present day of people being sort of like in a boiler room where their desires are generating steam, and there's all this pressure building up from the steam of sexual desire, and it's building up and it's building up and it's building up and it's building up, so that unless you open up the valves and let it all out, your damn boiler is going to explode. And so you've got to give yourself ample opportunity for letting off steam. And he says, first of all, that no one has discovered within human anatomy that there's anything resembling a boiler room. But apart from that, he says the actual appropriate image is more like a yes gate. Those who are the computer programmers and scientists know these yes gates. You have a choice. If X, then Y. So you have a choice, yes or no. So when you choose yes, then yes, and then yes, and then yes, and then yes, and then yes. So that's his argument, that the way it really works is not that by letting off steam you solve the problem, but the more you let off steam, the more you have to let off steam. Well, there's a lot here in the chat box. I'm allowing ourselves to go a little bit over today because there's no program on the Tuaco channel this evening, and the comments are coming thick and fast. So let me see where we are here. Oh, coming up on 8 p.m. Yeah. Gruda says, that's currently the Christian notion. I am religious as long as I have sex just with my wife. Yeah, we have a tougher principle than most Christian denominations. Tougher, I mean more austere. But Christian doesn't limit sex if it's within his marriage. Yeah, and he drinks wine and he eats meat also. So what can we say? Prabin says, in line with the product value, even though it's not the guru's fault, if the disciple does not follow the 4 regs, yet the ISKCON product seems to lose value, especially when the outsiders come to know of divorces happening within the community. Not commenting on the current gurus who may be accepting disciples out of emergency to further the movement since the gurus are the ones who are accepting disciples, how do you see that the future gurus could tackle this? Well, I'm not going to, I think I said, I'm not going to sit here and give advice to our gurus about what they should do. Most of them are out there more than I am. They have many disciples compared to my small handful. So I'm not really here to give advice to them. They have to use their best discretion. I'm just putting out here what Srila Prabhupada said. At least we should know what his teachings were. And of course, you'll get my bias on what I think, but I certainly am not here to tell ISKCON's gurus what to do. Forgive me for that. Okay. Gurudas basically agrees with some things I've said. Dr. Patel does not believe in killing animals. Yeah, okay, so that's the Panchatattva is just confirming what Prabhupada said to Dr. Patel about meat eating. Tulsi Priya says the Tamil's essay is called The Boiler Room and the Computer, and it's in Mauve Gloves and Madman, Clutter and Vine, and other stories, sketches, and essays. The information's on your chat box. Now, I didn't recommend that you read this non-devotional essay, even if it's well written and it's kind of a blast to read. But, okay, should we end here and take this up again next Thursday? Yes, Tulsi Priya.
I have a comment, but it can we let it go? End tonight.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Did you say that or did Maharaj? My comment is that I won't go into the whole story, but I had an experience very early on in my Krishna consciousness when I had to deal with this question of illicit sex, because I was at some seminar and somebody was kind of understating the importance of following this absolutely strictly. And I had learned right from the very beginning, unlike the Bhakti Shastri teacher, that, what the illicit sex rule was. And what it came down to for me when I was sort of butting heads with this person who was saying something different in a class is that I think even if you told a couple, yes, you can have sex every day if you like, as long as you're prepared to have children whenever and whenever they come, that's the real issue. It's not so much only once a month, it's that you have to be prepared to accept a child. And most people don't want to do that. So if you relax the rule and you're not prepared to accept a child, then you have to resort to contraceptives. And then you have the whole snowball effect of becoming completely, enmeshed in the situation. And I think in the Grihastha Vision Team articles, they were sort of alluding to that, but not very directly. They were saying, you have to be prepared to accept children, even if you're not following that very high standard. And I don't know how honest people are about that. It's like, people love their children, but it's a huge burden to have 5 or 6 kids, if you're having sex whenever the mood strikes. I'm not hearing. Got muted.
Yes, thank you. There's much more to be said here, and I think there's ample material for our next meeting or so. But certainly, I think that there's a tendency not to be honest about what the less strict standard is. First of all, the idea that there is a less strict standard, that this is some sort of standard by popular vote or consensus is a question itself. But then what is that less strict standard? You know, what does it really involve? That is not something that I've seen very straightforwardly acknowledged for the most part. You know, it's that, well, we don't follow the strict 4 rules, but we follow, you know, the lesser standard. The lesser standard is basically sex on demand with contraceptives. That's really what 3.5 rules comes down to, as far as I can understand. Because we hear that these, it was in one of the essays on the website there, that the strict standard is followed by some, you know, it is possible, and it's followed by some rare advanced devotees. And the rest of us follow, you know, the lesser standard. Well, if that's going on, we would expect to see a lot of really large families, which we don't. So there must be some intervening apparatus which is employed here to prevent that result. We'll talk about these things more and what Prabhupada has to say about it. But I think we can stop here. Again, our purpose here is, before we get to anything else, well, what is it that Prabhupada taught? What we might do about it, how we might put it, how we might adapt it, how we might be sensitive to people who are struggling with these principles and so on. Those are further questions. But before we get to those questions, we have to at least know, what is it that Prabhupada taught us? What is it that he said these 4 rules consisted of? And as the questions have been raised, where did he get these ideas? And are they really principles, or are they some sort of cultural, one of those cultural oddities from his Bengali upbringing, or is this really the Vedic message? These things we have to deal with first. What is it that Prabhupada was teaching, and how serious was he about it? Then we come to any other questions that we might have. But first of all, let us understand what it is that Srila Prabhupada was teaching. With that, we wish you a good evening, and thank you very much all for your valuable association.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hare
Jai
Krishna.
Maharaj.
Thank
Jai Maharaj.
Jai. Haribol.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Thank you, Hari Prabhu.
Much Maharaj.
Hare
Maharaj.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you.
Krishna Maharaj.
Thank you, Krishna.
Perhaps you can be like the President, Maharaj, and pardon all us turkeys.
Us turkeys.
On that note, glorious to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol. Jaya.